Hi again. I'm gonna do a little bit more talk about codependency and addiction. I think first I'm going to, where's my phone? Read something off my phone. And I think it's really good. So I want to just talk about how people are perceived a little bit. Okay. She's not crazy. She was abused. She's not stupid. She was manipulated. She doesn't have an attitude. She's actually protecting herself. She's not bitter. She's speaking the truth. She's not hanging on to the past. She's been traumatized. She's not acting weird. She lived in a nightmare. She's not weak. She was just trusting. She's not giving up. She's healthy. So that could be used for the opposite gender, of course, because actually both men and women can be completely despicable. It's not just one gender. So bad behavior can be had by all, any age. So why am I reading that? I think because I've been really trying to work on myself and trying to change how, trying to surrender more, to a higher power. Because honestly, my I know I've talked about this in my other videos, but, when I had a child abuse when I was younger with my mother, for sure, and then, the robbery that happened, it'll be 6 years ago on the 20th. If I hadn't had a relationship with God, I don't know how I would have come back from any of those things, because there was nobody I could have told that really dark stuff to that would have understood me and not judged me. It was a reckoning, times in my life where my whole identity, beyond even my physical recovery, but who I was as a human being, and what my place was, in this lifetime. What am I here to do? What's the point if you're, you go through some things that are just so bad where you're just it's what on earth is that for? You can't make heads or tails of what would that be about? What lesson would you need to learn so badly that would need to happen? I don't know. I just always was really bad at assigning, I would blame myself a lot for some of the stuff that happened. And, even when I was a child, it's that doesn't even make any sense. Clearly somebody wasn't minding the store, or that wouldn't have happened. So I don't know how I would find a way to blame myself, but somehow I did. I guess maybe for not getting over it, because I did there's all these trauma therapies like EMDR is the big hot one, where they put a finger in front of you and your eyes follow it, and then it's supposed to move, you're almost minorly hypnotized, but not really. And then it's supposed to move the trauma from one side of your brain to the other to process it. Like a lot of times they say like, well, if you have nightmares, um, like trauma nightmares and stuff, that it's because you haven't processed it, because like it's just sort of stuck. Because when you're in fight or flight, the messages to your brain don't go to an area where it would like process it through. It's more like it's like doesn't get fully emotionally processed. So like there's that. I've tried that. I mean, I've tried everything, um, and not working, just a little bit, like a fraction. But maybe it is because I'm not good at giving up control. And I mean, to surrender is such a beautiful gift, really, because if you can surrender, it's like you can like lift that burden, and if the Almighty would want to take that burden, it's like you would not have it keep re-hurting you, or possibly hurting others with your behavior issues, that you're not always on top of. But or if you are, there's always something that still needs to be tweaked or something. But I don't know. I think it's really hard for people who have like been in a position where it was life-threatening, and then, no, I'm not making an excuse, but I'm just saying how long a process of unraveling it takes. If you've been in a life-threatening situation, it's extremely hard to give up control over your protecting yourself. It's almost like, I don't know. It's like, it's harder. It's instinctual, I guess, to, want to live is the number one. I mean, like any animal, in the wild, that's what they all want to do. They want to not be prey, and they want to survive and thrive. I mean, so I suppose it's not that surprising. But in terms of life and death, I guess I was going to talk about Mary Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein. I don't know if everybody knows that a woman wrote it, and she wrote it at a time where, women did not write books. Her mother, actually, I think her name was Mary Wollins. I can't pronounce her name. Mary W. And Wollstonecraft. She wrote like a feminist, I guess, like rights book back in like the 1800s, early 1800s, and it was very shocking that anybody would have done that. So she was kind of a badass. So Mary Shelley, I don't think she had much that remarkable in her early life, but when she was about 17, between 16 and 18, she met Percy Shelley, who was, I don't know, he was like the dreamy, like nature-loving, sort of ethereal poet of the times that was really famous. And sort of the opposite of him was a poet named Byron, which I think he's usually more popular. And Byron he had a club foot, and he very dashing, extremely charismatic and handsome, and he's a big ladies man. And so it was like he was kind of like always wrote really dark poetry. Was just like kind of like a gothic figure. So he was kind of the opposite of Shelley, but they were buddies. And anyway, Mary W fell in love with Shelley, and then unfortunately he was married with children, so that wasn't very good. And I think Mary Shelley was 18 when they actually legally got married, and they tried to have a daughter, but I'm pretty sure she died only a few days after the birth. Of course, at that time, there wasn't medicines, and there was a lot of diseases and illnesses, and Mary Shelley had 5 children, and only one of them survived, a son who was named after his father. I think 2 other children died of like illnesses, maybe respiratory, like when they were toddlers, I believe. And I'm not sure about the other ones. I know she almost died giving birth maybe to her last child, and somewhere in there was a terrible miscarriage. So she had a really incredibly graphic sort of association with birth and death, and she sort of had this extreme emotional energy she wanted to get out of her, and so she decided to funnel it into a book. Well, first it started out Byron, Shelley, and then Mary, along with this ex of Byron's named Clara. She was like not a serious relationship of his. Oh, is that her name or is that the daughter's name? They ended up having a daughter together. I think the daughter's name was Clara, or maybe they're both similar names, but the daughter died early on too, maybe before 5, and I can't remember why either, Byron's child. But anyway, those 2 couples, and then one other guy who's a very strange man, but he was like a scientist, doctor type guy. He was also staying with them, and they all went to this Swiss chalet, which is like a fancy castle type Airbnb back in the day. And it was on Lake Geneva. I want to say it was 1816. I'm not sure. And one of the things they did, because of course they didn't have TV or, you couldn't go to the movies. So what they did to entertain each other is they would sit around the fire and tell ghost stories. And so that is how the book Frankenstein started. It was a ghost story that Mary told on that fated summer. And it was like the beginning of her, writing this epic monster story. And so when you really study Frankenstein, which I've done because I think it's like a masterpiece, it's really comes down to not only issues of abandonment, but issues of like self-identity, I suppose. Like it's very confusing because like Victor Franken, I think he has almost the same name as the monster. Frankenstein's, I think, the creator, but of course everybody calls like the monster Frankenstein, but he might have just been called the creature back then, or the modern Prometheus was the other title. And the reason he wants to create this thing is, he's an egomaniac, and he thinks he knows everything, and he thinks that he can channel, electrical impulse that's going to spark life, which he actually ends up doing. The only problem with it is, like, he's an asshole. That's the problem. Is he's a jerk. And so when he does create the creature is not what he thought. Like, the way it looks, like the way he had wanted to finish how it looked, before he gave it life, but he didn't get to. And so it's really like an unfinished version of what he wanted to create. And his first reaction to it is that he is repulsed and disgusted by the monster, and he is repelled by him, and he wants to kill it. But of course, since he didn't even know if he was even gonna make it alive, like, he certainly has no idea how to kill it, right? So, and that's kind of the tragedy of the monster too, because it's like, I don't know if he's gonna live indefinitely, or like, nobody knows, because there's never been anything like him before. And so the creator, throws him out of his life, and he does make friends with, like, a blind man and then a little girl at one point, but that doesn't go very well, because he ends up drowning the little girl, because he doesn't understand humans, like what would kill a human. And he the monster becomes obsessed with wanting love. He wants his creator to love him. That's his whole thing. And so he demands that from the scientist, but Victor, he doesn't want to have anything to do with it. And in fact, he leaves. He goes to Geneva, Switzerland, and takes off, like, hoping to get away from the monster, because the monster ends up killing, like, his dad has a heart attack because it tries to kill I think it's his brother and his fiance or his wife, I can't remember. And so the monster follows them up there, and then they end up sort of up in the Antarctic, and the monster goes up there, and the scientist follows him. And I think that there's something in there about how a scientist, I guess, when he was raised, his parents didn't like him, or he wasn't treated well or given love. And so I think at the beginning of the book, he, like, in a way, wants to create this modern Prometheus, as he calls it, who would give him the love that his parents wouldn't give him. But then he ends up, he doesn't want to have anything to do with them, and he keeps running away from him, or trying to find him to murder him. And I just felt so sorry for the monster, because he's kind of doomed. That's the cover. Because he wants a companion. So that, I don't know how I think maybe somebody teaches him about Adam and Eve in the Bible or something, and so he knows that a rib was taken out of Adam to make Eve, so he wants the scientist to make him a mate. And of course, the scientist like just tells him he's gonna do it, but he's not really gonna do it because he knows he like can't make a good creature because he failed so badly at the first one, and he hasn't studied or learned or done anything since then about that. And of course he wants to get rid of the first one anyway, so why would he do that? But he pretends like he's going to, and then sort of at the end Victor ends up dying, but it's like some kind of, I can't remember, some kind of reaction to the cold, or there's some kind of accident or something happens up in the Arctic region, and the monster watches him pass away. But then the monster's like kind of gets sad because he like starts to sort of have this like fake idea in his head that like he loved him, but that's kind of ridiculous because how can you love someone who hates you that much? I don't know. I guess he's his creator or his parent, really. So it's kind of a terribly sad book, but I always kind of used to think about it as sort of a metaphor for addiction. I know you were wondering, why am I bringing this up? Why on earth? But times when I was sort of struggling with getting off drugs in that period of my life, my early 20s, sometimes I would think about that book, and like sometimes it seemed to me like the addiction itself was just so heartless, and so like there was nothing about addiction that like was there's no humanity in it, right? It's just like a cold substance that it's really indifferent to you, right? It's just, substance doesn't care whether you ingest it or not, or what you do with it. It's indifferent. And I would often think that it was like kind of the relationship between, because the monster was so desperate to be human, and I would think about, oh yeah, it's kind of like the addiction. It's like the addiction itself, the substance itself, is just like this sort of ruthless thing, like the scientists, like it's just it's everything that's artificial, everything that can be controlled by man, but it doesn't have any sympathy and empathy. It doesn't care about you. And like the monster was like almost like all the sensitive, I always think like a lot of times addicted people can be people who maybe feel stuff too much, or they they've had tragedies in their life, or they have just a deep sensitivity, so it's like things bother them more, like they have more depression, more dark feelings, more anxiety, like they're just like almost like I would always think of like someone who needed to escape in drugs or alcohol, like somebody, I would imagine like a body with like no skin, like just all nerves, just like just wanting to like not feel, and not having that like skin to protect you from feeling the elements. And I definitely remember many times just thinking, when I was in that period of my life, it was like 3 years where I still felt like I was myself, but it was like the way I behaved and the extreme physical suffering and withdrawal and the sickness and just the sheer acting out of all. It's just like there's no filter of like, I'm going to decide to do this. Everything was like you just did it because you were desperate, like a trapped animal. That's how you act. And I always think of like the monster, because like he's just walking around or running around, just all these feelings, and he doesn't know what to do to shut down the feelings, how to control himself. Like he's all feelings with no protection. And I would always think of that. And then how sad, like when people do get really addicted, it's like, their family and friends, can't stand them anymore, because they're just, they steal from them, and they don't care how they are affecting other people. And they're just, it's this miscommunication. And it's like, again, the substance is just something that is monetary value, that there is no redemption or any kind of anything about it. It's just an object, really. And just all those things would go through my head. I don't know. I guess that's what happens when you're a literature major and you're having a bad day. You think about all these books. So in terms of codependency, I was going to say something else about Frankenstein. I guess I can't remember, so I'll have to talk about Anna Karenina. This is like a very thick, giant, massive Russian novel by Tolstoy. And it is definitely has the other one that's really big on codependency is Wuthering Heights, which is like a love novel, but it's like on the moors, the turn of the century, and it's this couple who falls in love with each other, but they're really just mirrors of each other, but it's very emotional. Okay, with Anna Karenina, she is married to an older man. She has a young child who's, I think, like 12. And she's like this gorgeous woman of, they have money and this gorgeous home. And she's, not in love with her husband, probably never was, because he's so much older than her. And then, of course, there's this dashing young soldier. He's kind of bourgeois, so he's got a few pennies, he's got some money. And she falls in love with him. I can't remember his name, something with a V. And everything is going really great for them, like in terms of their passionate romance, until, society finds out, and then she's in a big trouble. Of course, her husband divorces her, or and she, she's banned from, she has no money. She's thrown out of everything she had, and she can't ever see her son again, which is like the worst part of it. And so she becomes like at the beginning of the novel, she was independent, elegant, well-to-do sort of enchantress, right? But by the end of the book, she's kind of like, I wouldn't say she's penniless, but women couldn't really have an income back then. So she's definitely shut out of that world. And, she can't really have a job or anything. Well, her station in life, if she was, working class, of course she could have. But I want to say his name's I can't pronounce it. Boyfriend. Well, she goes to where he is living, I guess, near the barracks and he goes off to work, comes back, and honestly, I think that she's a little older than him. It's been a while. But she just has nothing, right? She gets to sneak in and see her son once. But it's kind of like all these books of this time period, whether they're Russian or American or British, they're all kind of the same. Like, if there's a woman of a certain means, like, it starts off, she's gorgeous. By the end of the book, she's always, like, about to commit suicide or, being, like, thrown out of wherever she was. It's always, like, her demise, because it's like being a woman back then was just not, you didn't have a lot of options. So the whole point of this, and this is the last book I'll talk about, is she just doesn't have anything to do with her life except be in love with, her hot young soldier guy. And he's ill prepared, I guess, to deal with that. And I mean, he loves her, and like I don't know. It's not like true love or anything. I mean, he has strong feelings for her. But I wouldn't say that, I wouldn't say he's going to, like, totally disrupt his whole life. So I guess he doesn't really love her, but he's willing to, try to find some way for them to be together. But, it's pretty clear that that's not, it's not the way it was. Like, he's not as smitten as he was. And she becomes just this really desperate. Like, she's just super clingy, and, like, all she does is try to get his attention. And it's like all her personality, or everything she was that made her sort of unique and mysterious and, iconic. It's like that all goes away, and she's just kind of like, what I guess you'd say, the worst part of herself. Like, if you could boil someone down, like, all their good qualities evaporate, and there's, like, just basically their worst qualities. This is basically what she's like. And honestly, I think I wouldn't say she's mentally ill. I mean, I think she's just heartbroken because she lost her child, and I guess her station in society. But I mean, that sounds so materialistic and, whatever when I say it. But I mean, it did mean something. I guess it meant something to her in terms of beauty. Like, I think she's really obsessed with, like, how she's gonna, keep him if she's, bedraggled. Like, she doesn't have money anymore. And, it just gets really, like, super awkward and uncomfortable, where it's like she just gets, like, uber codependent on him because, like, I've explained her circumstances. Like, it's grim, right? And, like, the more she does that, the more she clings to him and acts, like I said, in, like, kind of like her lower self, if you will. The more he sort of distances himself from her. And then, hopefully none of you are going to be super depressed if I tell you the ending. But yeah, she ends up throwing herself in front of a train, so that doesn't end well. But it was like one of the great plot lines of literature. I mean, everybody wants, like, to do their dissertation on this book, because it's like, it's got everything. It's got romance, class, politics, drama. So I guess that's a really kind of elaborate representation of codependency, but it's a little bit like addiction in that, I think I said in one of my other videos, with addiction, it's like whenever anybody I would ever, when I was younger, I was much less of a private person than I am now. Now I'm like pretty private. If anybody ever found out about that part of my life, they would just be like, oh my God, like, how does somebody, how did that, why did you do that? Or how did that even happen? Because most people would, do like maybe lighter things, but nobody would do something that serious, where you could overdose and die so easily. And, just, it's a very graphic lifestyle. And I would always say, well, it's not like you just like, one day you're like, oh, I'm going to like become like this shadow of myself who everybody can't stand, and I'm gonna be broke and like emaciated and unable to like function and homeless and jobless. Like nobody is like wants to do that. Like it's like a slow breakdown. Like first you're like, I hate to use that gateway term, but it's like you do something and then you do something else, and like it doesn't, it doesn't seem like it's that big of a deal, and then it just sort of, that's way down here, like the progression. And that's kind of like how she was as a character. It's like she doesn't become like, the woman who throws herself in front of a moving train. You would never picture that when she was, in her amazing ball gown at the beginning, and, la-ti-da, and like a woman of a leisure. It's hard to imagine like how would she get from there to there? But it was like, a slow progression. Like this happens, much like when somebody ends up living, in their car. It's like, it's not overnight. It's like a series of unfortunate events, to use that phrase, that keep building and building and building, and then they're suddenly in this position they would like never have dreamed they'd be in. So I think that's all I have to say about that. So I'm about at time for the video, so I think that'll be it. Okay, have a good night.